Hello there and welcome to another edition of Unrendered. I have with me a special guest from Trinidad and Tobago. He is Mr. Steve Maximay. You will meet him when we come back from the break. Hello and welcome back to Unrendered. I am Tony Regisford and I'm sitting with Mr. Steve Maximay from Trinidad and Tobago. He is the founder of Science-Based Initiatives. Steve, welcome to St. Vincent and welcome to Unrendered.
Thank you. I haven't been welcome to St. Vincent in a while. I consider myself a native, so that people hardly welcome me to St. Vincent. They tell me, welcome back home.
Okay.
But I'll allow you to get away with that for now.
Tell us, Steve, you're the founder of SBI, Science-Based Initiatives. What exactly is this organization?
It's a consulting firm. I started thinking about going into private practice, as it were, while I was employed at the Agricultural Development Bank in Trinidad. And then subsequently, while I was teaching at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, I kept telling students year after year of all these opportunities in the private sector. And it dawned on me one day that at some point, one of these students are going to ask me, if there are so many opportunities out there, what are you doing in here teaching still? You know? And eventually in 2003, I made the move and I founded this company. It's a part of a wider holding company called Plan Pro Associates. But Science-Based Initiatives is really a consulting arm of it. And our tagline is that we influence the fate of the Caribbean, where FATE stands for food, agriculture, tourism, and environment. So those are the 4 areas I tend to work in.
So there's definitely a strong base in terms of agriculture. That's been your training as well?
Primarily my background, yes. My first degree is in agriculture. I'm a plant pathologist by training.
Okay.
And I drifted into development banking. I was head of the farm management and training unit at the Agricultural Development Bank in Trinidad for a number of years. And it dawned on me that the solutions to the problems in agriculture aren't limited to one discipline.
Okay.
So I shifted from strict plant pathology and crop protection and got into development financing and a whole host of other things. And eventually it took me into the University of the West Indies, where I ran the first business office in a science faculty in UWI.
Oh,
and that is where the shift towards, I suppose, the private sector came.
Now, if we stick with the agricultural sector, how do we get young people interested in this sector?
Okay, this is a question I've been asked, I mean, from when I was young, which was considerable time ago, as you can tell. But we have always had this complaint, a legitimate complaint, that the age of our farming population, it's always been over 50. It's always been over 50, over 60, and in some parts of the Caribbean, sometimes over 65. And one of the first ways I sought to address that was back in 1991. I wrote a book on careers in agriculture. Okay. Because I genuinely believe that there were possible careers in agriculture that the majority of the population, especially young people, about to make that choice after choosing their subjects in Form 3, what are they going to do? What is this agriculture thing about? And how broad is it? And as we continue talking, we'll probably have an opportunity to look at the real scope of agriculture. Agriculture is not only about farming per se, although that is important and it's a very, very useful activity. But there are so many other careers adjunct to farming, actual farming, that are involved in agriculture as a career path.
So some of the career opportunities, for example, that you can impress upon youths that reside within this agriculture sector would be what?
Okay, well, I mean, it's actually from A to Z, from agronomist to zoologist.
Right.
If we think in terms of the various aspects of agriculture, there's a production base, which most people are familiar with. They think farming, they think raising livestock, etc. There's a service base in terms of the marketing, because it makes no sense if you consider agriculture only the production of the food at the farm gate and not how it's going to be consumed, how it's going to be used, etc. So there are service provisions, there are careers along the service part, whether you're going to be a veterinarian, a plant pathologist, or what have you, providing those services. Marketing.
Right.
Now, we can add the non-food aspects of agriculture. Because you would appreciate that not everything that is grown under the rubric of agriculture is going to be used for food. So we have the purely cosmetic, if you like, the landscaping, you know, the flowers and beautification generally.
Yes.
And now you have also the possibility for industrial uses of the agricultural produce. So you have cocoon oil, you have a whole lot of palm oils and so that aren't edible oils, but they are oils that are used in industry, etc. Off camera, we were talking about some of the more microscopic entities. Right. I was telling you that in Trinidad, for example, in our marine industries, and so we have accidental emptying of bilges, and so, you know, bilge pumps being used indiscriminately. And we have the technology for bioremediation, where you actually use living material to literally eat up all the pollutants. Right. So as I said, there are a whole range of opportunities, you know, and I think we limit ourselves and we limit our young people when we let them think that agriculture is primarily or solely about growing something for food. But as important as that is, don't get me wrong, that is very important, but there are so many.
You come from the angle of being a consultant now. You taught the subject at university, and now you have your consultancy firm. How impactful have your services been across the region? Because I'm assuming that you traverse the region. And are you seeing significant shifts in terms of the orientation of people's thinking along the lines of agriculture?
Okay, I've been lucky, if you consider luck to be opportunity meeting preparedness. I've been lucky over the years to have worked in every CARICOM country. Right. From Haiti, I worked in Suriname even before they were a member of CARICOM, and so I can speak with a fair amount of authority in terms of what the landscape looks like in each of these countries. There has been a shift. You're finding more young, better educated people getting into this sector in various little sub-disciplines. So there are areas like protected agriculture, what we would call in this part of the Caribbean greenhouse
farming.
Greenhouse farming and that type of thing. At the biotechnological end, at the marketing end, where people have built businesses on moving material along the value chain. Because that is something I feel very passionately about. I've written about this whole concept of value chains and adding value, getting people to realize that the price that you will get at your farm gate for dasheen with 2 inches of mud on it will not be the same as what you will get if you were to scrub it off, slice it, etc., etc., etc. And the fact that as you add value along this chain, money is being made. Now, I know colleagues like people like Jethro Green and so understand the need for the producers to control a lot more of that value chain. And right here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you have the Vinci cluster, which is an agro-processing cluster, which shows that you can earn more along the value chain. I have suggested, and it's been suggested by other people as well, obviously, that we should look at value chains as being looped value chains. No longer should we be thinking about what happens to the produce until it gets to the table. So it's not from farm to fork, it's from farm to farm. We should be concerned about what happens to the so-called scraps, the waste material. How are we going to compost it? How are we going to loop that value chain to make sure that all that we have spent money in producing is being utilized? And that is significant, not only in terms of the producers earning more, but as we come to talk more about the impact of global warming and climate change and the fact that people are concerned about packaging material, how much packaging material you use, we will find that as we try to export material out of the region, people are going to be putting us under pressure in terms of what type of packaging material you use, whether it came from a sustainable forest, the whole, that
sort of thing. Because then you're introducing the concept here now of something green. And green in the terms of environmental deference, right? You know, deference to the environment. Now, let's then talk about organic farming. Now, where are the opportunities here?
Okay, the organic route is a niche market. It's a very lucrative one, but it is one that requires monitoring, and it's expensive to get into it. Now, I know that there are people looking at this program now who say, but I've been going organic all my life. Now, pesticide-free is not organic. There are particularly stringent rules in terms of what constitutes organic. So you can have an organic operation downhill from somebody who's using chemical uphill, and you wouldn't be able to sell that in the US or anywhere else where it's being monitored because it's still under the influence. It's still under the influence. Yeah. So that I'm very, very wary about promoting organic without people understanding the full implications of it, the length of time it takes for certification, etc., etc. Yeah. What I do promote is sustainable agriculture, pesticide-free agriculture, low impact, low input chemicals, that type of thing.
Would it be fair to say that pesticide-free agriculture is non-chemical agriculture?
Non-chemical agriculture. Well, it's not always non-chemical because sometimes you're using inorganic fertilizers. You see, they're very, very specific. The people who are the very strict organic people, you can't use manufactured fertilizers.
Now, there seems to be a move, and we're going to stick with organic or organic context of agriculture. Yeah. There seems to be a move worldwide, actually, heightening of people's awareness of the use of chemicals and the bad that it does to the human body, basically. Yeah. We see, well, it certainly would appear to the layman without empirical evidence, and I'm sure the empirical evidence is there, the rise of cancerous type illnesses. We've seen that among
some of these chemicals have been shown to be carcinogenic. That is a fact, yes.
Right. Yeah. And there's definitely a shift in people's awareness. Yet, we seem to be taking a long time to catch up with this. What's driving this?
And there are reasons for that. And the reason is just the sheer impact of the weight of numbers. Yeah. The thing is that we need to be fed now, today. And it is not always possible, I want to be very clear about it, it's not always possible to make that radical shift from so-called conventional agriculture, where one is using chemicals made from fossil fuels, which is something else we'll talk about in a little while, hopefully. But the sheer magnitude of the problem, the fact that people have to be fed today, you can't really have the horse starving while the grass is growing. So that the shift, this radical shift, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. This radical shift to organic. What I think is going to continue, which has started already, is that there's going to be a gradual weaning, as it were, away from strict chemical use and conventional agriculture to more sustainable, more traditional, because traditional is coming back,
Right.
All of these fancy terms that we scientists are coining now about ways of operating and mulching and all that. I mean, our grandparents used the same principles.
Steve,
before we got bright.
We're at the end of our first segment. When we come back, I want to pick up this whole thing about traditional farming techniques, and I want us to get into that when we come back. Yeah. You're looking at Unrendered, and my guest is Mr. Steve Maximay. More with Mr. Maximay when we come back. Welcome back. You're looking at Unrendered. I am Tony Regisford, and I'm chatting with Steve Maximay. Steve, when we went to the break, we were talking about, you brought it up, actually, traditional methods of farming. And I'm very interested in this area because, as you say, the brighter we get is the more we go.
The more we regress. Unfortunately. And I mean,
I wasn't going to put it that way.
As a scientist myself, I'm the first to admit that we sometimes get carried away. We get brighter than we should be sometimes, and we throw the baby out with the bathwater ever so often. Now, I'm not by any means poo-pooing chemical agriculture. I mean, it has taken us out of the woods, on a number of occasions, and I still think there's a need for it. And even while I speak about traditional agriculture, at one side of my mouth, I was the head of the Trinidad and Tobago foresighting committee that looked at biotechnology for Trinidad and Tobago. And biotechnology is in no way connected with traditional because we're talking about,
because you're talking
gene movements and that type of thing. Right. So clearly, I can appreciate the fact that traditional agriculture holds a lot of promise, and that what some of these commercial organic growers are saying may be a little too far off the edge for me, for people like me.
Right.
But traditional, clearly, I understand that.
So what would be the traditional means? Right? Give me some examples.
Composting.
Right.
Basically composting. I mean, and whenever I say compost in this part of the world, everybody tells me, yes, I do that. I have some stuff, you know, at the side of my yard there. You know, that is not compost.
Because here's my concept.
That is not compost.
So let me give you my take on what. When I hear the word composting, here's what I conjure up. You're taking all your fruit and all the peels, all the kitchen scraps and so on, and you're piling it up in a heap, and something is going to happen there.
By magic.
And it's going to become this fertile patch, you know. And that's where I'm giving you an honest opinion.
And I'm telling you, based on my movement through the Caribbean and my experience, I'm telling you that 99% of the time, that is exactly what happens. People have a little pile outside, especially outside the kitchen window, where they throw all the scraps.
Right.
And if they make the mistake of throwing scraps of meat and so, then what they've built is a rodent factory.
Oh.
A rodent apartment. But clearly, composting requires a little more care than that.
Yes.
One has to turn it, you could start it with soil and so. So just having a pile will eventually rot down into useful material. But 9 times out of 10, the piles I see in people's yards, because they're untended and because they just have stuff piling up on them.
They're rodent factories. They're unhealthy.
They're unhealthy.
Yes.
And if not, they're just glorified mulch.
Yes.
Mulch being just a covering, you know, of dried leaves and so on the soil that would, you know, that would
so what
retain water and that type of
What
thing.
did the people of yesteryear do with composting that you want to
They had the time. They had the
now?
time to plow material in properly. They had the time to wait for stuff to break down properly. Even when they were using chicken manure, not necessarily chicken manure out of a broiler operation where you've just pumped antibiotics into the chicken.
Yes, so you're talking about the yard fowls.
I'm talking about yard fowls.
Fowls that you
have to pull off the trees. I mean, when you want to cook them, that type of, those kind of things. No. That had enough time to break down because I shouldn't say even, our forefathers recognized that chicken manure is a heated thing, that you couldn't just take raw, as it were, uncured chicken manure and just throw it on a plant, it would burn it. Right. So they understood that. They had the time. They had proper cycles in place. They were not gearing to the kind of market-driven thing that we are geared to now.
So the pressures weren't there.
The pressures weren't there.
Yeah.
So that they had time to have the thing settled. They covered it. They understood the use of soil. Whether they knew it was the bacteria in the soil that was starting it or not is immaterial. The fact is they knew what they were doing, and it worked, exactly. Now, if you just have a pile of stuff there, especially some of these newfangled varieties, because one of the difficulties of trying to go organic is that you're using seed that has been prepared genetically for a particular kind of agriculture. Let me give you an example. When I grew up, washing wheels was something that, you know, boys had to do as well. So you had the kitchen window there after a Sunday meal. You had tomatoes and so for lunch. There would be seeds and so in the plate. You wash that over the kitchen window. A week later, you'll see tomatoes growing all outside the kitchen window. That wouldn't happen now. Those tomatoes now are in no way able to compete with the weeds outside that kitchen window. Whereas the hardship plants from before were. So now these plants have been bred deliberately to be part of a system of production that incorporates herbicides, pesticides, etc. They're flail, they're weak. I mean, they're at the extent where, especially tomatoes, and I like to use tomatoes as the example of a plant that we have fiddled with a lot. So that it's difficult to get genuine, authentic strains of tomato plants that haven't been fiddled with too much. We have fiddled with the plants so much that there are certain varieties, they can't even stand up by themselves.
You have to prop them up.
You actually have to take a piece of string, tie them up like this so that they can bear, because if just the weight of the food that we want from them, because we want a tomato that when we slice it, will fit on a burger bun, that type of thing. So we have fiddled with it to the extent where we can't just say we're going to go organic tomorrow and use the same seeds, right? So when I talk to people here in St. Vincent, like Lennox Lambkin, it's people who are really, really concerned about this kind of agriculture. They recognize that you can't just go and buy seed off the shelf and say you're going to go organic because it just isn't prepared. It's not ready. It's not ready here.
So, but you're talking about the pressures that we have today that drives the way we produce stuff as opposed to, or in contrast to what happened
40, 50 years ago.
40, 50 years ago. Seems to me, Steve, as if we have to roll back some of our expectations. And this is a shift. This is a paradigm shift there. This is a shift in what we now expect. Use the example of the slice of tomato that's designed to fit on a burger bun that's a particular size. Now, are we to adjust this way of thinking if we are to get back into true organic
yes.
farming?
We consumers, want a tomato that will sit in a fridge like this without doing anything for a week or two. You know, we want a tomato that we can pick here and ship 2,000 miles away, and they still look fresh as if they were just picked.
Yes.
Those are some of the sacrifices we have made, because a genuine, real, authentic tomato should go bad after 3 days, because something else must be interested in eating that tomato apart from us. You know, I don't want a tomato that is so cardboard, you know, that it's going to stay there on the shelf for 6 weeks watching me while I watch it, because it has been cured and manufactured really to stay one particular color. I don't mind if my tomato ripens, you know, splotches of yellow and red, and so I don't want it to be perfectly red. I mean, that type of thing. So we have bred all those things into it.
It's interesting you spoke about the rotting process, if you want.
Yes.
Because
that to me is the major side. If other things are interested in it,
yes.
I mean, I can, just as an aside, I can give you this little story of my experiences in Guyana. We had a thing in Trinidad that we only buy cabbage with holes.
Okay.
Right? Because if the worms could eat it, we could eat it.
Right.
Because we knew the amount of chemicals that we were spraying on these things that, you know, clearly, to get a perfect cabbage in Trinidad in the early 1990s, that thing went through so many sprays, you know, that it comes out there perfect, not a hole.
Right.
Nobody wants to buy that. I mean, I should say the people in the know. The people in the know don't want to buy that. We want the ones with holes.
The worms not interested.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is a true story. Yeah.
Somebody gave me that story with fish, you know. Somebody said to me that if you're going to buy fish and there are no flies around.
and I prefer to go there idea, because although we've been talking primarily about crops, agriculture, of course, as you know, involves aquaculture and fisheries and so on. That tends to be the sort of distant cousin to agriculture. People don't tend to think of aquaculture and fish and so on. That thing about fish, I'll just tell you that in Trinidad in particular, we have a major problem with fresh fish.
Yes.
Trinidadians want fresh fish. So the fishermen oblige. They catch the fish in Maracas or Las Cuevas. They come into Port of Spain or some of the, you know, well-to-do suburban areas, and they take that fish out. They don't put it in ice, because if you put it in ice, the average Trinidadian will pass and look at it and figure that's not fresh fish.
It's been there for days.
It has to be fresh.
Yeah.
So what they do is just leave it out. And every now and then they sprinkle some water in it, and so. And I mean, that is the worst thing you could do. That fish, sometimes you press it like that. That's what I thought you were going to talk about. When you press fish like that and the indentation stays, you should walk away, because, you know, things are happening to that fish already, right? So I'm just saying that, you know, in the context of our expectations, in the same way we have expectations for fish and for tomato and things that stay one way or stay one color, we have set ourselves up for this. Yeah.
Let's take a slight shift to the organic side of things. We may come back to it. Let's look at agriculture and how it's being heralded now as an economic sector, or part of the.
It's a money-making thing.
Right. Governments, certainly in my experience, have put a lot of emphasis. St. Vincent is no exception. Trinidad may be different, actually, but St. Vincent is no exception, with some of the governments that have gone hell-bent behind the tourism industry and preach it as the ultimate solution. This is where we're going to get jobs from. This is where we're going to get job creation and wealth and so on and so forth. And sometimes that may have been done at the peril
of agriculture.
Of agriculture. Do you see that?
I would have agreed to that maybe up to 10 years ago or so. But because, again, of my experience, I have been able to come across so many really, really excellent examples of agrotourism, where the linkage between agriculture and tourism extends beyond the provision of food for tourists.
Yes.
Where agrotourism means a lot more, in the sense that we never saw our agriculturists or our farmers as stewards of the environment. What people are paying to come here to see and experience all this green, verdant lushness and all that. We, those people of us in the agricultural sector, who are the ones managing those areas, whether they be in forest or not. Because remember, forestry is also another aspect of the whole remit of agriculture.
Yes.
We are responsible for the environmental stabilization. This sector hasn't been credited with keeping the place green to avoid the type of disasters that we've seen recently in St. Vincent, where having denuded some of the hills, the type of damage and destruction that is caused when you damage watersheds like that, when you denude hills, when you, for whatever kind of development, whether it be slash and burn agriculture or for housing. And they're equally guilty. Yeah. I have a serious problem with people who think that only slash and burn or only agriculture creates those problems. When you clear 5,000 square feet to build a house, you are denuding it as well, because then you're going to put zinc or something there and it's going to run into one little drain like this, and whoever is lower down, well, the catch as catch can. Yes. So clearly, there are so many things going on. I mean, this is such a vibrant sector, in my opinion, that link between agriculture and tourism is as alive and as well in some parts of the Caribbean as anything else. Especially Guyana.
Let's pick that up when we come back from the second break. You're looking at Unrendered, and my guest is Steve Maximay. More with Steve when we come back. Welcome back, and you're looking at Unrendered. I'm Tony Regisford, and I'm chatting with Steve Maximay. Steve, the linkage between tourism and agriculture, so vitally important, because one does not have to mean the precluding the other. They should mutually exist. Yes. And I know you've been doing a lot of work.
This is my hobby. This is my hobby horse. Yes. So you just open.
Because you've talked about agro-tourism. And
there are many definitions for agritourism, but I'm comfortable with the fact that we are talking about linking the two sectors. I've built my entire practice on linking those four sectors that I mentioned at the beginning of the program. Food, agriculture, because it's very often people don't see agriculture as being connected to food. Food, agriculture, tourism, and the environment. Yes. And we have seen where the new tourist, the type of tourist who is concerned about global warming, who is concerned about food miles, who doesn't want to travel the same distance as the food that they're going to consume, those are the people who are driving these new linkages towards agro-tourism, the link between agriculture and tourism.
What do you mean when you say food miles? I mean, you come back to
it's a concept that gained credence out of Europe. Because of their concerns about global warming and the fact that food is being transported using fossil fuels, which is adding to the carbon dioxide load, which is contributing to global warming.
So we're talking about carbon footprint here.
Yes. People, concerned tourists, primarily Europeans, yes, are very concerned that they don't want to come to St. Vincent, travel by jet, already complicate the matter, and have food that travel the same distance. Right. Even within Europe, there are concerns. You look at the major chains in the UK, let's say the Sainsbury's, the Tesco's, etc. They are all using it as a marketing tool to see that they're bringing their stuff in by rail rather than bringing it in by lorries. Yes. So that whereas one locomotive is equivalent to maybe 100 lorries, they're saying that we are now bringing stuff in by lorries, so we're not contributing. The food has a lower carbon footprint than food that would have traveled all those miles. So you're saying, there are tourists out there who are keen on that. So you're saying, they make their choices based on it.
You're saying then, I'm trying to put it in your words, that in St. Vincent, for example, there are potential tourists who would make the choice of coming to St. Vincent simply based on the fact that they know when they get here, the food that they're going to consume is grown locally here, or didn't have far to travel.
Didn't have far to travel. I wouldn't say they're based only on that.
Yeah, but that's one of the factors.
That the philosophy, the overriding philosophy of the country is one of low carbon development. Yes. And this is something that President Jagdeo has been able to articulate and gain not only credibility but funds for, in the sense that he understands the whole concept of a low carbon footprint development strategy, where you are going to reduce the amount of fossil fuels used. And all that ties into your organic thing, because all of these chemicals that you're ostensibly using in your traditional conventional agriculture,
Yes.
all of them have been produced using fossil fuels.
So,
So you see how it all ties back? I mean, I'm sorry to be rambling, but
no, you're doing fine.
It's
Yes.
just, you know, they're all interconnected. So that this business about agrotourism, when we talk about ecotourism, we talk about on-farm tourism, there are people who are quite willing to come to a country to see how bananas are grown. Because we take it for granted that everybody knows what a banana plant or a tree or a vine, they have no clue. Whether it's a vine, a tree, or, you know, a tall 60-foot thing, they have no clue. To come and see that, or to come and experience that, is a different experience.
So you're actually saying that a hotelier who goes for a different style of hotel sets up his plant, his hotel, on a farm, for example. And part of the attraction for his guests would be to experience this farm existence, see how things are done, and at the same time eating what's coming off of the farm. And
it doesn't have to be that radical a shift. In other words, you know, we are not saying that you're necessarily scaling down the amenities. Because although people want the experience, they don't want the wild part of it.
Of course.
They
don't want the mosquitoes
and
the sandflies.
And they don't necessarily want to have an outhouse either.
No.
They want indoor plumbing.
Yes.
But I'm saying that within that construct, it is still possible to cater for the concerns, the genuine and legitimate concerns of tourists in terms of whether your food was coming from near or far. Part of the consulting I've done in Tobago and to some extent in Barbados has to do with Green Globe certification. Green Globe is an environmental standard. A lot of these tour operators, especially out of the UK and so, are specific in terms of the types of hotels that they recommend to their potential travelers. They want them to go to a hotel where there's a certain amount of respect for the environment, respect for the local community, and when we get to fair trade, we'll talk about, you know, the involvement of communities and so that when we got those properties in Tobago to Green Globe benchmarking, which is the first step in the process, they were monitoring the electricity use, monitoring the water use. I mean, we in Trinidad and Tobago have a different, rather unique problem. We don't really worry about energy bills.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Exactly. I know, and we leave taps running and that type of thing. So that once you start monitoring those things, we have systems in place where you monitor your meter and you see how you've been using electricity, how your air conditioners have been serviced, etc., etc. We then use that now to show the tourists coming that, you know, this is a property that is sensitive to the environment.
It's green.
And you have no idea the drawing and marketing power of that.
So there's a huge marketing pull for the notion or the concept that you are.
I mean, Dominica set us straight
you're
first,
green.
But
yes.
I think the rest of the Caribbean is fully on board.
Yes.
If not by word, by deed. But majority of them are on by word. Some are on by deed.
Apart from the green concept, let's look now at the fair trade concept.
Okay.
You just mentioned it. What is fair trade?
Well, I mean, the St. Vincent, I mean, the people in the Windward Islands, I mean, the pioneers, I mean, WINFA has been the pioneer of the fair trade movement within this part of the world. Basically, it is a mechanism, it's a system of operation where consumers are prepared to pay a premium for food that has been ethically produced. What do they mean by that? They mean that these people, these producers, are the ones they want to reward. They don't want to reward the middlemen and the big Del Montes and the big companies, and so they want the actual producers of the food to earn a decent living. They want them to earn a decent living, and they want to reward them, literally, for doing it in an ethical manner, so that those of the people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines who are familiar with fair trade know that the farms have pit trees. I mean, there are a whole range of things that have been done. There are certain chemicals aren't allowed, etc., etc.
Yes.
And that on top of that, there's something called a social premium that is paid. This is almost a top-up price. So you have the traditional cost. Your costs are being covered by the price that fair trade people are willing to pay. Yeah. And on top of that, they're putting this social premium because fair trade is not an individual activity. There can be no one fair trade grower. Fair trade growers are organized into groups, into fair trade groups. I think there are about 13 in St. Vincent and Grenadines. And those groups then market under the fair trade label. That little sticker you see on the banana there. And that has meant, I mean, tremendous benefit. I think this is one of the most underreported stories coming out of the Windward Islands. And it pains me, literally, every time I have to talk about it and people look at me as if it's the first time they're hearing about the social premium. The fact that there are school buses and so that have been bought on these funds, because the social premium is meant for the community.
So it goes back.
It goes back to the community, and I think that, I mean, I can find very little fault with a system like that.
No, but are there difficulties in at the consumer end? Let's assume that let's use the UK market, for example, and I'm really going back to that traditional crop, bananas.
Yeah, sure.
And so we have the fair trade banana, okay? It's going to be selling at a premium on the supermarket shelves in the UK.
Yeah.
It's going to be a more expensive product than the non-fair trade bananas.
The Chiquitas. I mean, we're allowed to say it here.
Is there really a viable market? Are there people that are seriously willing to pay, and a critical mass of people that are willing to pay a higher price to cover that social premium that you're talking about, and the other costs that are, cost implications that exist for doing fair trade farming?
I think we in the Caribbean, speaking as a Caribbean person now, we have no concept really of the depth of, I mean, some people consider it guilt, whatever it is that drives Europeans and Americans, in terms of they understand the consequences of global warming. They understand the consequences of climate change. They feel responsible. Let me give you a local example. Caribbean Airlines, what used to be BA, is a small airline. I mean, it's our airline, we're proud of it and all that, but they only have a few planes. Even Caribbean Airlines, if you go to their website, you will see on their website where there's a portal where you can pay to offset your carbon footprint. In other words, every time you travel on a plane, let's say there are 200 of us on this flight, this thing is putting out 2,000 tons of carbon dioxide, we are responsible for 10 tons. You can pay, let's say $20, to go into a general fund, which is called carbon offsetting, which is another area that I consult in. And the people who are managing that fund will probably tell you that, look, we are planting some forest in Tanzania or somewhere, and that is going to compensate for the amount of carbon dioxide that you just put into here. We are going to take it out via this.
I hope all this works.
We Caribbean people, we don't. I mean, a lot of people look at that and they say, "Well, I didn't cause this problem, so I ain't fixing it."
But not only
a lot
that,
of people are very concerned.
How does one
know that they're really going to plant something in Tanzania?
Exactly, because the concept of greenwashing, I heard
of course it's
this concept. A few months ago, where you have, for example, you check into a hotel, you check into a hotel, and the hotel says, "Do you want your towels done today?" And
because they're going to save the amount of detergent and which is genuine.
But basically, a lot of these people are
charlatans,
looking at their cost and trying to drive their cost down. They don't care about the environment.
But green makes sense. I don't care what motivates them. To be quite honest, if a person does the right thing for the wrong reasons, I mean, there's a fine line there. Later on, I'm going to worry about that. But if they're doing the right thing, if they're genuinely reducing the amount of chemicals that they use, and they happen to make money, fine. Because that's why I consulted Green Globe. The properties that go green are going green out of a sense of altruism, yes, and everything else. But it's green because there's green at the end of it.
And so
there are bucks at the end of it.
The end justify the means, you think, in this instance?
Well, I'm not sure if I want to go that far. What I'm saying is that I am not going to stay on the sidelines and judge why they're doing it. I'm saying if they're doing it and the benefits are positive, what goes on in the back of their mind, what motivates them, what got them started is immaterial. If they're greenwashing in the sense that if they're saying
that they're doing it
and not doing it, that's something else. I mean, I think there's legislation and there are mechanisms to deal with that. You can decertify them on a whole range of, it's like organic. I mean, that whole organic thing turns out to be a farce in a number of cases, right?
How do you know it's truly organic?
Americans may be trucking manure from one state to the next. I mean, that's in strictly organic terms, that's not on. Because you're using fossil fuels to move the thing. Right, so better using fossil fuels to make some fertilizer.
You're still getting up this carbon footprint.
Exactly. So it's those types of things. So greenwashing, I would have a difficulty with. But the fact that people are going green because it makes financial sense, that's just a business decision for me.
Steve,
I have no real difficulty with that.
We're at the end of our third section, and when I come back, I want to have you wear another cap, the cap of reprographic rights, because that's
intellectual
something
property.
and intellectual property.
Yeah.
So we're going to
That's
spend the
another hobby
last,
horse.
we're going to spend the last segment talking
Sure.
about that and
No
just
problem.
leave the agriculture for a while.
But it will pop back in, eh?
Good. You're looking at Unrendered, and my guest is Steve Maximay. When we come back, we'll be into our final segment. Stick around. Welcome back, and you are looking at Unrendered. I am Tony Redisford, and my guest is Steve Maximay. We're into our final segment. And Steve, I want to introduce you to our viewers now as something else that you do. And I'm seeing here that you are the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Reprographic Rights Organization.
Right.
What is that?
What is that exactly? Okay. Reprographic rights have to do with the intellectual property rights that deal with photocopying, literally.
Okay.
It has to do with the reproduction of people's creative output.
Okay.
Once it's print or photographic format, and including maps. Because for countries like Trinidad and Tobago, maps and cartography and so very important in terms of oil, where oil wells are, that type of thing.
Okay.
So the end of intellectual property that I'm involved in currently has to do with photocopying, basically, and the fact that the authors and photographers that we represent, we are looking after their rights as part of what is called a collective management agency. Yeah. A lot of people will be familiar with copyright in terms of music or television programs. Programs. And people understand that, that it's illegal. Yes. It's illegal to photocopy, to copy programs, etc., etc., and to copy CDs and to copy DVDs, etc. Right. We're not going to talk about the enforcement. We know it's illegal. Right. And in Trinidad and Tobago, of course, we keep boasting of how TRIPS compliant we are. TRIPS have to do with the trade-related intellectual property rights. A lot of Caribbean countries signed on to these intellectual property rights regulations, saying that we are going to protect the creative output of other people, whether they be our nationals or others, because we want to be part of the World Trade Organization. And as a condition, you have these trade-related intellectual property rights. In effect, what it says in principle is that if St. Vincent and the Grenadines, let's say, decided that they're no longer going to respect intellectual property rights, they're not going to respect brands, they're not going to respect labels and that type of thing, then people are free to take them to the particular tribunal of the World Trade Organization, etc., etc. Okay. So that's where I
now hinged on all of this is the concept of the knowledge economy.
Yes.
And before we go further,
people talk about that all the time.
Yes. What are we protecting here? It's something that
it's intangible.
Right, and it's based on this concept of the knowledge economy. Expand on that for me, please.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to come across as an expert on the knowledge economy, but from what I've been able to understand and from the involvement that I've had, because again, if luck is opportunity meeting preparedness, I was lucky enough to be on a cabinet appointed committee in Trinidad that actually wrote the draft intellectual property policy for the country. So I'm in a position to speak with a certain amount of authority about Trinidad and Tobago.
That's right.
So intellectual property has to do with the express creation of the human mind, not the idea. Because a lot of times in St. Vincent and other places, people say, well, the thief my idea. You can't copy, you don't have copyright or patent protection on an idea. You can't patent an idea. Right. Once it's expressed, if you draw out a circuit or you paint something or you write a book, that is the express creation.
Or you create a program.
Or you create a program. Yes. You create a program. You bring somebody from Trinidad and create a program.
Right, okay. So I can copyright
exactly,
this.
Exactly, exactly. With my permission, of course. Yeah. Right? So the idea is that the express output of the human mind is what you're protecting. A collective management agency like the one I represent, because I can't know where in the UK somebody is going to take my book and photocopy it illegally, they are collective rights management agency. What it does is the same thing with music and so. If you're a musician here and your work is being played in New York, in America, there's an agency that is monitoring the radio stations when your work is being paid, and they're repatriating the funds to you. What we do in Trinidad is that we are monitoring.
So you're one such agency?
One such agency, but only for print.
Right. So
And,
it's a
and
network.
It's a network. And
Yes.
the head organization is really called IFRO, which is the International Federation of Reproduction Rights Organizations.
Right.
And this is the world body, and there are about 79 or 80 countries that belong to it. So it means my work as an author or a publisher in Trinidad, I can feel comfortable knowing that if in Tuvalu in the South Pacific somebody is copying my work or using my work or wants a license to fund. Because it's not about being against photocopying. It's about recognizing that this is somebody's work.
Yes.
And that is where the knowledge economy comes in. A knowledge economy is based on that kind of output, intellectual output, as opposed to an economy based on goods.
But intangible versus tangible.
Versus tangible, exactly.
Yes.
And that, in a nutshell, would be it.
And
we all say we're heading down that road.
When is it safe to photocopy then? Because
it is legal to photocopy under particular. I'm using the reference to the laws as they apply in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
Although I know that there is a regional network of harmonized laws, but I don't want to come across as a lawyer or anything. I'm just saying that, especially in the case of photocopying, you're allowed to photocopy sections of books, sometimes about 10% or so, because really you should be purchasing the book. Now, before the audience jumps up and say, you know, I'm poor, you know, I have 3 children going to the same school, and why I should buy 3 copies of the book, that is handled differently. The Ministry of Education can get a license, and based on that license, they would be able to photocopy various sections of particular text that the schools may want to use. So that it is possible for a Ministry of Education to obtain a license, and that would cover everybody.
And then they can
so whether you live in Fancy or you're down in Union or wherever, you are covered. You follow?
Yes, yes.
So it's not as if it's not draconian. I think because the breaches exceed the compliance, it becomes topical because people breach it with impunity. I mean, people copy stuff here all the time. We won't even get into the illegal, you know. It is a business activity. And if one wants to put it in the context, in the same way that we tend to treat predial larceny as if it's nothing at all, because everybody knows that, I mean, if you're passing, you pick a mango from your neighbor, what the hell, I mean, he ain't go dead, right? But when you pull up with a pickup into the man's orchard, shake down all his trees, damage the trees, interfere with the crop next year because you're damaging the trees, then how could that be predial larceny? What is this thing about predial larceny anyhow? Why do we have to have separate squads for predial larceny? It's because we think it's not really thieving. You know, it's just predial larceny. And in the same way we treat photocopying and so on, most of the legislation, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a special squad of the police that deals with that. Because we don't see it as really, you know, it's not really a big thing. I mean, nobody ain't go there if you just copy a copy of a thing. Right. Because we have no respect for property generally. As if you have no respect for tangible property, far less for something that you can't see. You know, people move with it with impunity. Because if a fellow wouldn't think twice about taking 3 or 4 mangoes from your yard, which you can see, which we can catch him with, far less, you know, using your brand or using something else, you know, that will infringe intellectual property rights.
Your organization in Trinidad certainly have a huge communication message, and you know, you're virtually educating the society in an area that previously would have been seen as, you say, no big deal.
It's no big deal. I mean,
you know, so how
nobody ain't dying for that.
How are you getting that message out?
With great difficulty. With great difficulty. No, I think because the legislation is so strong and draconian in Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, it's $250,000, although it's only TT dollars. I know that everybody here is going to be like, that's not real money. But I mean, $250,000 TT is real money in Trinidad.
It's real money here.
It's real money here. It's how much of a thousand it is here. But the idea is that it's draconian and includes imprisonment as well. Now, how successful we have been, we're at this stage where we are getting ready to send out pre-action letters to the major breaches. And the breaches are the universities, the tertiary level institutions, because they're charging people to come to these schools. And then they're using other people's intellectual property. And lecturers are putting together course packs, photocopying things willy-nilly from all kinds of books. And it's the ease with which a license lets you do stuff like that. I mean, I worked in the system. I mean, I was a member of academic staff. I know how difficult it is to get permission from a publisher in the UK to take some work from his book and put it into a course pack. We had to actually write to Wiley and all these big names publishers and so individually. Now, with TTRRO, you can just call our office and we can give you a license because we represent their interest in Trinidad.
Yes. Now, looking across the Caribbean, and if we could move from the topic of reprographic rights and just look at intellectual property
generally,
in general,
yeah.
you know, in your experience, is this something that's getting any traction at all?
It is.
It's varying from island to island. Which islands are ahead of the curve?
Jamaica is ahead of the curve, especially in reprographic rights. As a matter of fact, the OECS reprographic rights mechanism is being more or less channeled or marshaled through the Jamaican impact. There's a regional body that's been formed. Barbados has B-Copy, Trinidad has TTRO, etc.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I would say that Jamaica is ahead in terms of like photocopying. Even with ASCAP, I don't want to get into the details of copyright legislation throughout the Caribbean, but I think that it's gaining traction. A lot of these islands and the business people in the islands are the ones who should be concerned, because to be non-TRIPS compliant has significant legal and other ramifications. I think we haven't been taken to task as yet, but there are parts of the world, China for example, where people go in there and say, look, you have infringed our intellectual property rights. They slam some serious embargoes on you, you literally get jammed.
Right.
We haven't done that here yet, but it's coming.
Yes.
It's coming. And I think it would be to all our benefits to do that. Because, you see, if we use a local example, let's assume an American came to St. Vincent, bought a pirated CD from Beckett, right? Beckett music, right? Goes to Trinidad, takes a pirated copy of Marshall Montage, goes up to Jamaica, takes some Beanie Man, goes to the States and produces a CD and says, puts a stamp on it, copyright material, do not copy. It's really stolen material that he's taking in.
Yes, yes.
And what we have similarly going on is something called bioprospecting. Large corporations and agencies are moving around the Caribbean and taking germplasm, the same tomato plant that that we're talking about, putting it together, licensing it. That's the other side of intellectual property. I just wanted to, for balance sake, to show how it could be misused, as it were. So they're bioprospecting. They're going around there, taking all this biological material, going to a lab somewhere in Europe or in the States, putting together a plant that they have now licensed. And they're telling you, you can only get this plant from us. We are going to put a terminator gene in the seed, so that even if you keep seed from one crop to the next, it won't germinate, because we have made sure that you have to come back to us right there. So that's, as it were, the downside of the whole intellectual property thing. But as I keep telling anyone who's willing to listen, I don't believe in a level playing field. That level playing field thing is a cliche that went out the door a long while ago. Because in Trinidad, we found out what a level playing field means. When we were trying to qualify for the 1990 World Cup, we had a return match with the US. We went up there, boys practiced on the field. The night, they wetted. Fellas turned up for the match in their little rubber studs. Field wet. Level, but wet. You know why? Because they understood the rules. The idea is to know the rules of the game. And that, to me, is more important than a level playing field. Because even the playing field is like this, I know that halftime I'm kicking down, so that's I'm coming out full blast, because I know the rules. And I think it's more important to know the rules than to get this utopian thing about a level playing field. But I don't believe in that at all.
You know, getting back to this whole thing about attitudes in the Caribbean towards copywriting and so on, there are people, and Trinidad, I'll use Trinidad as an example because that's where you're from. There are people who build entire businesses on stolen products.
Of course.
I go into video stores there. That's the business.
You get it pre-released, before it's released in the US.
But what I'm saying, that's the entire business. It's not a sideline.
It's not a sideline.
It's the entire operation where they sell pirated movies.
Don't say pirated, stolen.
Stolen movies.
Stolen, yeah.
You know.
And stolen music too. From local artists as well as...
So where's the enforcement?
As well as
where's the enforcement?
Skinny Fabulous and everybody else.
Because we can have the legislation, but where's the enforcement?
That's part of the problem. Our legislation, I can speak only with authority about it, let's say Trinidad legislation. Our legislation had some sort of funny little simmy-dimmy that said, if you're going to stop a guy selling pirated CDs, let's say, you had to take some kind of record of each of these CDs. So when you found a guy with 1,000 CDs, no police was going to sit down and write out. We've since changed it, mind you. But that was one of the reasons why they said they prosecuted so few people. But mind you, we have prosecuted people in Trinidad for that, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, we have prosecuted people for it. But not the guys on the side of the road. The fellas on the side of the road with their little car batteries and thing and the music and in the blast.
Well, it happens in St. Vincent.
Yeah, I know. I can't speak with authority. I'm blind when I'm in St. Vincent. But I can speak with authority about Trinidad. So that it is a business. And again, just like, I mean, if you could bring in another agricultural product, just like illegal drugs and so, the people that get caught aren't usually people who are responsible for their thing at the macro level. Because some of these CD replicating machines and so cost a lot of money. It's not the guy inside the road who bought that. The person we need to arrest.
Somebody's driving
additional
from above.
people we need to arrest are the people above, you know.
Yes.
And it's the same argument we could use with the drug trade, with everything else. I mean, it's unfortunate.
Now,
that's how it is.
Is this a work in vain? Are we ever going to make
more
significant? I'm talking about the Caribbean. Are we going to make significant inroads?
I'm optimistic. You know why I'm optimistic? Because it's not being driven by us. If it was up to us, we probably wouldn't do it. And I make no apologies for saying that. But all of it is being driven from outside. So our concerns know about the environment, everything else is coming from. Once the Americans caught that cold and sneeze,
we're going to catch it.
All of us sneezing as well. Not going to, we have already done so.
Yes.
Because once the Americans were forced to explain where their cardboard and their packaging material is coming from, and they're charging them differently. Once you export to the US, they're asking you, you know, so are you holding your manufacturers to the same standards? If you're not, it can't come in. So we are being forced, as I said, it's all a feedback thing. So I'm very, very, very confident that we will get there because it's not being driven by us. You know, it's being almost imposed, if you like. And that is part of my optimism.
Well, Steve, you seem to have quite an interesting life. On the one hand, you are dealing with the exciting topic of agriculture and the resurgence of it. And tourism. The fate, as you put it, food, agriculture.
And the environment. We haven't spoken about climate change and global warming and carbon trading and all the other things like that.
And then on the other hand, you're dealing with
intellectual property.
But
they're all linked, and that is what keeps me sane, in that it's not as if I'm flying off in different directions. I can link all of those things that I'm working on currently. You know, so the agriculture has to do with the bioprospecting. So if I'm in Guyana, I'm talking about bioprospecting, they understand that in a different way to how a Vincentia might probably understand it. Because they know that in the Rupununi and all, the people are out there doing things that they have no idea what they're doing, you know, and taking it and coming back with it. So.
Well, excellent.
But sadly, it's a nice ride, though.
Sadly, we're at the end of this program. And I understand you're going to be sticking around with us for a few more days, and then you'll be back. So thanks for popping in.
Hey, my pleasure.
Okay. You've been looking at Unrendered, and my guest was Mr. Steve Maximay. Jomo Thomas is up next with Plain Talk.